You're on air.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully people will find us. All apologies for the technical glitch. Um, it's the cold. Let's blame the cold because it's freaking cold today. So, Stephanie, how are you?
I'm doing great, except for the freaking cold. Yeah.
Yeah. Jeremy, how are you?
I'm great.
Awesome. So, today our topic is divinatory revelations. Um, And we've got a lot that we're going to cover. We're going to start, I think, with basic definitions of what divination is, and then different ways that divination is done. Uh, and I think we're going to talk very briefly about Nostradamus, the Malachi prophecies, sometimes called the prophecies of the popes, the Fatima prophecies, maybe Bhagavanga, and I have one other that I'm going to throw in at the very end. Um, so anyway, divination. What is it, and what is its connection to revelation?
Hmm. So the first we have to talk about Revelation, right?
Well, we've already done
Apocalypse.
that.
Yeah, we
We've already.
have, but if this is somebody's first time with us, there's apocalypse. There's two sorts of versions of the apocalypse. One, the common perception of it is the end of the world sort of thing.
Mm.
Well, the more scholarly is a revelation. Apocalypse means revelation in Greek, if I'm correct.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's out of darkness or an unveiling
Hmm.
is what it
Hmm.
means.
Right.
Um,
And so, in
uh,
which case, divination. What is the definitions of divination? I mean,
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say there's two different ways to address it as well. There's a more scholarly definition, and there's a more popular definition. Popular definition ties into the end of the world and has to do with telling the future. Well, a more scholarly definition would have to do with just seeing the stuff that is normally not seen, or having access to information that is not necessarily accessible to most people.
yeah, and I
Anyway.
think that's ties in very nicely to the idea of apocalypse, this
Hmm.
discovering what is hidden or obscure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would also see divination not necessarily connected to like in terms of apocalypse. I would
Hmm.
see divination is has more lower tier
Hmm.
um, understanding where you are just um, divining the future or something that is unknown.
Hmm.
Um, so you're and using some sort of tool or some sort of connection with a supernatural entity to come about with those answers. What was revealed to you? Was it in a vision, or were you using tarot cards? So I think divination can be something other than simply more top tier
Right.
um, end of the world type of thing.
Right.
Mm.
Right. And I think that was the point of my two definitions, is that commonly people think of it as relating to the end of the world or the future predictions. While there is ways like the indigenous and original tribes used to use divination to find where the deer are so they could hunt more
Hmm.
effectively.
Mm.
Things like that. Or you could
Your
use it to find your lost keys if needed.
a divining rod, right? What did
Hmm.
they use
Right.
that for? To find water underground. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's important to, I mean, it's there in the word divination, divine. And
Mm.
so I actually looked up the etymology of some of these terms. And divination, of course, is derived from deus, God, deity, but it also comes from the Sanskrit, devas. And
Mm.
I thought that this was a nice little connection to apocalypse in terms of the idea of out of darkness, because the devas in Sanskrit literally means to shine.
Mm.
So it seems to me that one way of thinking about divination is that it's shining a light onto something. And I think it's important that at the original idea that there were gods involved.
Right.
And I don't know if we want to go into it, but I was also wondering, what's the difference between divination and prophecy and
Hmm.
an oracle? And my understanding is that a prophet is just someone who speaks for God,
Right.
um,
Hmm.
and an oracle is, I don't know. It also has those ideas that someone may be speaking a pronouncement of the divine. I mean, if you think about the oracle at Delphi,
Hmm.
Hmm.
the Pythia was speaking. It was the god Apollo speaking through the oracle.
Right.
So I don't know. Maybe they're a little bit synonymous. I don't know if there's that much of a difference.
I feel that they're synonymous.
Mm.
That and there's really no difference if you have a divine or supernatural force that is flowing through a person. Um, Whether you call it an oracle or a prophecy, I think it might depend on what religion you belong to.
Hmm.
Right.
Like,
And
I think that with regards to, like, say, Catholicism, saying someone is an oracle might be frowned upon because it has too many connotations with the Greek oracles and non-Christian things.
mhm.
Whereas, prophet is biblical. The
Hmm.
prophets of the Old Testament. We look at them as, how we refer to um, the divine speaking to the people.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. To me, the two are slightly different, but I see there's a huge overlap between them. An oracle is somebody you go to receive divination or an access to a supernatural entity, usually a god. And so they end up
Yeah,
speaking to God. Versus a prophet is somebody that speaks in the name of that god, but it's not necessarily in touch with the supernatural, though the assumption is there.
I think you're right there in terms of people will go to an oracle. Like, it's almost on
Mhm.
demand, right?
Right.
Whereas a prophet, they they receive it when they receive it. It's not
Right.
something that you could just go up to them and say, "Hey, what did God say today? What does God want me to do with my life?" And
Hmm.
I don't know.
Right.
It's not scheduled. So,
Right. And it is a huge overlap. It's just a slight difference for those that are interested, my perception.
Yeah, I like that. But I also want to add that an oracle doesn't necessarily have to be a person.
Mm-hmm.
yep, that would work too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, along those lines, one of the things we wanted to look at were different ways that divination is done.
Hmm.
And this can also kind of refer back to the different oracles. The number one that I have on my list, and I think this is one of the oldest, not necessarily the oldest, is astrology.
Hmm.
Yep.
Uh, I've got a list. I don't know if either of you have a list of different forms of divination, but
I keep one in my back pocket.
okay.
I'm just kidding.
All right.
No.
Well, here we'll go through the list and then we can talk
Right.
about any of these that we want. So I have astrology. I listed the I Ching,
Hmm.
which is also very, very old, and that's done a number of different ways. My understanding originally was the tortoise shells were the original method,
Hmm.
and then
Okay.
the yarrow reeds, and then coins, tarot, and
Hmm.
cartomancy in general, runes,
Hmm.
tea leaves,
Mm-hmm.
reading coffee grinds, dreams, and
Hmm.
also I would suggest dream incubation. That was practiced a lot in Greece, I know.
Yeah.
Looking at signs in nature,
Hmm.
like birds and and we do this for our seasons, right? And I noticed before the first big snow in Denver that there were seagulls. You get seagulls every now and then in Colorado, and I thought, oh, well, I know that they kind of get onto the stream and come over the mountains,
Hmm.
and they I'm like, oh, I wonder. I wanted to start look for patterns to see if I start seeing seagulls before snows. That's a way of divination, I suppose. Um, Jeremy, you were kind of getting at this with the indigenous traditions, but I just listed altered states of consciousness. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what
Mhm.
shamans do is they enter an altered state of consciousness
Right.
in order to find out many things. Um, Bodily signs. My first thought
Mm.
was like palmistry, but then I thought, the story of the Buddha when he was a baby, the father had the Brahmin priest come in, and of course they did a astrological reading of him, but
Right.
they also looked for very specific marks on the body
Right.
that might suggest what his fate may be.
Right.
Uh,
Like a baby's born with a call.
Yeah, yeah. Bibliomancy, just like opening a book and pointing. Um, Looking at entrails of sacrificed
Hmm.
animals.
Yep.
Mhm.
Reading smoke from fires.
Hmm.
And Stephanie mentioned divining rods, so that's another kind of
Yeah.
earth-based thing. Um, Maybe I don't know how old this is, but the use of pendulums. Um,
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
You see
Mhm.
people swinging them over the map and where it stops.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, some people use those in Ouija boards, another form of divination.
oh yeah, Ouija boards.
Did you mention numerology?
I did not mention numerology. Um, yeah, but that's a good one. I've never actually thought about numerology in terms of divination, but yeah, yeah.
Yep.
What else? What did I miss?
I guess along with the entrails, there's casting bones.
Yep.
Yep.
uh, I think he hit most of them. Um,
Crystal balls.
I mean, and there's always going to be more. Yeah,
Right.
crystal
Right.
balls and scrying mirrors.
Yes,
Right.
scrying. That's I wanted that one.
Hmm.
Um, because that's one of the ways supposedly that Nostradamus got his prophecies was through
Hmm.
scrying.
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess in his time, Nostradamus was not uh, highly thought of by astrologers because he often
Yeah.
got the astrology wrong. He didn't know how to
Right.
cast his own.
Yeah, he didn't apparently look at place and specific times. Although it was interesting, one of the um, I want to go back to our list here, but one of the criticisms I saw of Nostradamus was that what he was really doing was looking at the past. His idea was that the past was sort of cyclical, that things would happen
Hmm.
again. And an
Mhm.
astrologer is like, oh, that's not how astrology is done. I'm like, but it kind of is. We look at past, conjunctions and alignments and everything and say, oh, well, this is what happened that time. Maybe something similar will happen this time.
Hmm.
And this is, to be fair to Nostradamus in a sense, and, this critique, this is something that has changed radically with the advent of computers. Because with computer
Mm.
based astrology programs, you can actually go back in time where at the time of Nostradamus, that wasn't really something that was all that possible.
Right.
So,
You could rewind the stars now.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which is something I did for this broadcast. Went
So,
back in time and looked at my charts.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, what did
Yeah.
you discover, Stephanie?
Uh, well, mostly what I was looking at was instances of plague and certain astrological alignments. So, and I was looking at it specifically due to COVID, and
Mm.
found that it was quite fascinating how a certain alignment tends to come up whenever there is uh, this certain star alignment, not star, planet alignment. So we could talk about that later when we're getting into astrology, but unless you want to segue into it now.
Let's go ahead and
But
segue into it now.
Can I
all
just throw
right,
out there
Oh,
quick?
yeah.
Can I just throw out there quick? When she said, "Yeah, I did this just before this live stream," And I found stuff about plagues. I'm like, are we starting a plague with this? What does that
Are we
have to do with our life?
starting?
with the live
What does
stream.
that have to do with our live stream? And then you went to COVID. I'm like, oh, okay. You weren't researching for this live cast and got a lot of
Yeah.
plague stuff.
Oh.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm hoping we don't start a plague with it. That would be
Yeah.
terrible, right? Um, it's not me. It's the stars.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I for this I specifically was looking into astrology, and I thought, well, we actually haven't had a a real apocalypse where everything's destroyed. So there's no astrological alignment for that apparently. But there was COVID that hit in mostly in 2020, the beginning. But as we know, it may have started earlier than that. But it really came into our conscious awareness in 2020, starting in January, where we actually had this alignment that seems to come up whenever there are plagues. And it's the Saturn Pluto conjunction. This occurred on January 12th,
Mm,
um, in the sign of Capricorn. So you had that going on along with, at the time, Mercury and the Sun were there, all conjoined in Capricorn. And just to give you a little background, the sign of Capricorn is about, it's ruled by the planet Saturn, and it's about um, stability, structures. Um, you know, Earth, it's an Earth sign, so it's very much about like building structures and that are sound. Um, and here in this conjunction, when you have Pluto coming in, which is all about death, the underworld, rebirth, and uh, transformation, throws a monkey wrench into any sort of structure. So it's a fascinating conjunction where you have something like an illness, a disease coming through and destroying structures that we have, and also at the same time building up new structures, because that's what Saturn does. Which we had lockdowns, we had social distancing. Um, what we could and couldn't do was very much structured for us, and it was a fascinating thing for me to research. And
mm,
as I was doing so, found that this occurred. This conjunction occurred before the AIDS epidemic, or during the AIDS epidemic. It occurred in history, and I was able to look this up, so it was cool. Um, the Justinian plague of 1541 to I'm sorry, 541 to 549, where we had the first instance of bubonic plague,
mm,
um, and it reoccurs for the next 200 years, and then kind of goes dormant again, and then the same conjunction comes up in 1350, when bubonic plague, Black Death specifically, is ravaging Europe. And then it comes up again in um, 1520, 1518, I think, when you had the smallpox epidemic in North America. And also,
mm,
bubonic plague is raging again. It's resurged. So, yeah, it's being used now, um, as astrologers have started studying plagues. It's being used now to try to predict when the next one will be. And in fact, there were astrologers warning about 2020, somewhere between 2020 and 2022. They said there's going to be something big, a plague. So there were people sounding the alarm then.
mm.
Um, and as I was looking and playing with my software, I found that the next one occurs in February of um, 2054. So,
Hmm.
and I can't remember what sign it's in. I should have. I think.
Well, wouldn't Saturn and Pluto go conjunct like every 28, 30 years because of Saturn's cycle is 30 years, around 28, 30 years?
Well, also remember Pluto's moving,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so it's not exactly the same all the time when that
Yeah.
conjunction occurs, and there seems to be a prevalence for when it occurs in Capricorn, though not
Mm,
always.
mm,
Like the AIDS epidemic, um, I believe that one occurred in the sign of Libra,
mm,
which is interesting given that it's all about, Libra is about fairness. It's about, you know, the rights of people, and it really hit the LGBTQ community very hard.
Hmm.
Um, so, looking at that, that's a interesting
yeah.
alignment in that sign.
Yeah, because one of the things I was thinking of is that, especially if it happens a little bit more than every few hundred years or so, um, was polio and the Spanish flu. And even more recent after AIDS would be something like Ebola.
Hmm.
Yeah, I did not look at those. I had a sort of a rabbit hole I went
Yeah,
down yesterday, so I did not look at those yet. But I could plug that in if we want to look at it.
yeah. Well, Ebola is pretty localized. Let's
Hmm.
hope that that never spreads worldwide. Um, I know one of the things that I was going to mention later on was the Baba Vanga prophecies. Baba Vanga was a Bulgarian mystic, and I just watched this morning a 2024. What did Baba Vanga predict for 2024? And she passed away in 1996. But one of the things they mentioned was another pandemic,
Hmm.
and that this one's going to be far worse than COVID.
Interesting.
Yes, nine. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, 1916 is probably when we had a conjunction of Saturn and Pluto.
Okay.
Um,
And the
to
Spanish
get more
flu, I
precise.
always had that in like 1911, or did it extend
No, no,
to?
no.
Is it a little
That
later?
proceed that came after World War I.
Right. Okay.
It really starts hitting in 19 uh, 1919,
Okay.
1920.
All right. So it could have
But you
been,
have a go ahead.
yeah, it could have been precipitated by that conjunction.
Yeah, definitely you had a war in full swing when this hit,
Mm.
this conjunction hit. Um, in Actually, it looks like 1915 is when it hit. So the war is in full swing by then, and plague comes very quickly after it. Spanish flu,
Mm.
which coincides with some of the Fatima stuff.
Yeah, which we'll get to here in a little bit. Uh, yeah. So astrology's been used for a very, very long time to make predictions. I'm glad that no one has come up with a end of the world prediction for astrology, um, but we'll see about that. Anything else you wanted to add about astrology before we look at anything else?
Um, I guess it's one of those things that once you establish a pattern, you can start tracking it and
Mm.
seeing throughout history if
Yeah.
there are things going on similar at that time. But it's so often, like, if it's something that hasn't occurred before, you won't know it until afterwards. It's something
Right.
that you really understand in retrospect rather than future casting.
Right. Yeah, and this is what Rick Tarnas did in his book Cosmos and Psyche, and he was looking at the outer planets, so just Saturn, um, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. But he found patterns, very interesting patterns, and he found patterns even in individual lives of famous people as well. So that's always worth a look. Um, uh,
One other thing I'll add. Almost all of these conjunctions also occur while Mercury is coming right around, and Mercury is um, known for its connection to the lungs.
mm,
So, plague with, if it's airborne, something like that, you're going, or through the breathing, uh,
Mhm.
that connection is there, and it's a pretty interesting thing to see. Also, I'd say that in during COVID, when Mercury, I'm sorry, um, in the month of March, when we had social distancing starting, and we had uh, more of the lockdown started then, you had Mars joining them,
mm,
and Jupiter expanding it, right? Um, and there was one phrase or something I came across that was interesting, where some people were equating it to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The red horse representing war with the rider bearing the sword in his hand, Mars. The white horse signifying hope and whose rider carries a bow, Jupiter. The black horse as the oppressor of society, Saturn. And the pale horse known as death, Pluto.
mm,
So I thought it was a fascinating connection to an apocalyptic event,
yeah. Well,
good
looking at,
imagery.
I'm sorry, Jeremy, were you going to say something? Oh. Looking at the planets in the sign, Capricorn,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I'm going to segue here because when I read tarot, I do correspondences. And I think looking at those correspondences are really interesting because Saturn is the world or the universe. So we'll go with the world. Pluto is death. It's usually assigned to the death card. Um, and Mars is the tower. Mars is the
Mm-hmm.
destruction of absolutely everything. And Jupiter is the fortune card, but fortune can work two ways, It can increase or decrease. And it's interesting because it's in the sign of Capricorn and the card that
Mm-hmm.
associates with Capricorn is the devil.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
hmm.
the yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah. Um,
Wow.
so we've got astrology, I Ching. Do either of you ever work with the I Ching?
No.
No.
I don't either. And I try, but I think that a lot of the imagery is difficult for me to grapple with sometimes.
Hmm.
But I do like, and I think this is important in terms of all of this, moving it away from a godly kind of thing or with gods in general is, I think, one of the ways of looking at these oracles that we had on this list was the concept of synchronicity. And
Yeah.
I know that many want to try to suggest, that's how we should understand astrology. Is that the planets aren't causing these things. It's just synchronous. That there
Right.
is a inherent meaning that we have found in the planets and the relationship between the planets, but it's like a clock, right? And a clock or a watch when it says 1 p.m. that doesn't cause it to be 1 p.m. It's just a marker, and the planets are
Hmm.
markers in a sense of these like archetypal energies. And the I Ching works very much the same way in terms of synchronicity, and that's how I always approach tarot cards. My tarot readings is that it's just synchronous. If it makes sense, then it makes sense to
Hmm.
you. But if it doesn't, just move on and have a good rest of your day.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think even with astrology, there's a lot of people here. The planets are causing this, and
No.
I think most astrologers today would say no. It's
Yeah.
a reflection. It's a synchronistic reflection of what's going on.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Not It's not them influencing anything.
Yeah, Rick Tarnas pointed out in Cosmos and Psyche that the criticism that against astrology that astrologers think that the planets are causing this, he's like,
Hmm.
yeah, that's grounded in a materialistic worldview.
Right.
And in
Yeah.
order to
Right.
understand
Right.
astrology, you have to move beyond this
Hmm.
materialistic worldview, because
Hmm.
that's not what they're saying. They're not saying that Mars in this place is causing this. It's just a symbol, it's a sign
Right.
of what may be happening.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Now, I know Stephanie and I both work with tarot.
Hmm.
Um, Jeremy, what do you work with?
Um, I come from an animistic sort of shamanic background, so I work mostly with altered states of consciousness, not psychoactive induced states of consciousness. But for instance, before the show, we actually talked a little bit about what I do. I've done multiple things. I've done writing, I've done drawing, I've done rock reading, I've got a custom thing that I got from the spirits that I do, but all of them do the same thing. It disconnects the logical, reasonable portion of my brain and allows me to access information that I would not be able to access. So while I'm playing with these things, while I'm manipulating the rock, or while I'm doing this drawing, it's you mentioned automatic writing. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not.
Hmm.
I'm just writing. Right. I'm just writing, and it allows my brain to disconnect from what I'm doing and answer a question that I've been thinking about. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost
It
like a flow state.
it really does because I mean that's why they recommend for many people on a spiritual journey to journal.
Right. Right.
Because it will bring out things that you hadn't even expected because
Hmm.
you are disconnecting from that logical side and just writing out in stream of consciousness what's going on or
Right.
what you
Well,
feel.
like, but automatic writing is usually people that aren't aware of what they're writing, and I'm aware all the time of what I'm writing. But then I go
Hmm.
back and read, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting that I've had that thought now, or you
Yep.
know, or just drawing. I'm just drawing stuff. It's just really doodles, but it has nothing to do with what is processing in the back of my brain. It's just doodling.
Yeah, and some people feel that that is the way for the brain to go down into the subconscious to
Yeah.
just let things out,
Hmm.
and that we also, that the principle of as above so below, that
Hmm.
we are part of this greater consciousness, and that can sometimes come out in your writing. It's not
Right.
automatic writing, as you say,
Hmm.
that's something a little different, but it's sort of digging deep into the subconscious to allow um,
Right.
the collective conscious maybe even to come
Hmm.
out,
Right.
because we're all one, right? Or at
Hmm.
least some people
Right.
think this.
Right. And
Mm.
we spend so much time up in this higher portion of our brain, the consciousness, and disconnecting that, allowing the unconscious to come through, which is a far more powerful processor to me.
Mhm.
I mean, it has answers that happen. If I could access them, that'd be great. But this is how I access them: as I disconnect this portion of my brain and let them come out.
Mhm.
And then there's a collective consciousness below that, or the spirit world, or whatever you want to call it, or
Mhm.
heaven, whatever.
Now, you had mentioned that you utilize altered states of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you're doing in order to achieve those? I know that there are a variety of methods. I know you said
There
that
are.
it's not psychotropic. Um,
Hmm.
we'll fix that eventually.
Right,
But
right.
so what are you doing?
I do drumming,
Okay.
and so certain frequencies of drumming has been found to stimulate the brain and the central nervous system in certain ways to generate altered states of consciousness. So that's what I'm doing. I listen to drumming. Do my own drumming. And it's not like playing a set or anything like that.
Right.
It's just a repetitive drumming at a certain frequency. To Again, it's a repetitive motion. It's something that I'm doing with my body that allows my unconscious mind to come through,
Hmm.
or the spirit world to come through,
Yeah.
or however you want to see that.
Yeah, I had a very powerful experience with drumming. In
Mm.
fact, I did a training with Michael Harner.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it took me a while to get there. And my experience, the way and I've only ever had the one really interesting experience. But what I kind of took away from that is it just requires practice. You have to kind of
Yes.
keep at it at a regular basis.
Hmm.
Now, with the automatic writing, one of the things that why I had mentioned that prior to us recording this was there's a fellow who wrote a book about this. It's called Awe, the Automatic Writing Experience, Michael Sandler. And I'm not gonna say anything. I just want, whenever I watch him, my first thought is, just calm down, Skippy. Um, but one of the things that he recommended, because I tried his protocol for a while, I couldn't stick with it because it required getting up really, really early in the morning.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But he recommended listening to binaural beats.
Hmm.
And I know that you can achieve sort of altered states of consciousness with binaural beats.
Hmm.
And with the experience that I tried, the few times I did try all of this, was I was conscious of what I was writing in a sense, but there was a flow. There
Yeah.
was a flow going,
Hmm.
which seems to mirror how you were describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of a flow state where suddenly, like, yeah, one time I was sitting at the dining room table. I was just doing something on my computer, and I was kind of in this moment of doing something, and people started asking me questions. I was just throwing stuff out there,
Mm.
and it's just a moment, and people are like, "Oh my god, that's so amazing! Well, how'd you come up with that?" I'm like, I, I guess I don't know. I was just typing
Mm.
here.
Do you have your own drum?
I do, I
Okay,
do.
wonderful.
Yeah, made it myself.
Oh, cool. I want to do that. I know there are workshops every now and then to make your own drum.
Hmm.
I want to do that.
Right.
I also know that all three of us, but I'm going to start with you, Jeremy,
Mm.
dreams. I know that you
Yes,
used to have a blog where you would record all of your dreams and
I
pay attention to
did.
your dreams. Yeah.
Hmm. And yeah, I remember anywhere from 3 to 8 dreams per night, or depending on how you break them down.
Hmm.
So I used to record them all. I used to write down elaborate details, but it was taking me hours to write all these dreams at a certain point. And so I never got to the point of understanding what the dreams meant because I spent so much time just trying. So then I tried to narrow it down to what is the important context? What is the
Hmm.
important message that is coming through?
Hmm. How about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, I was recording my dreams for a while, and I always get out of practice with it because of my work schedule. Um, I have to get up too darn early, and and uh, if I don't also have an ability to sleep into a certain time, I don't
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
really have the dreams that I remember. So I kind of got out of practice for doing that, but I would record them. There was a point when I was doing that a lot, and I wouldn't say any of my dreams were divinatory. Um, they always were about something going on in my own
Hmm.
life, and I can usually figure it out.
Hmm.
Right.
Though I remember sending you a lot of them and saying, "What does this mean?"
Yeah.
I can't figure it out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I've been keeping
uh,
a record of my dreams since I was about 19, so
Mm.
just a couple years. Um,
Yeah.
but I have had divinatory dreams because I keep them in my journal, And because I've written them out, there have been times where, um, like a week or two later, the event happens, and I've been able to like pull out my journal. I'm like, look, see, I wrote this,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
dated. So yeah, so I always pay attention, but that's rare.
Right,
But it does happen.
right.
Um, so Jeremy, you do the automatic writing with the drumming.
Mhm.
Anything else?
Drawing, doodling,
Drawing, doodling.
and there's
Stephanie.
a
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, no, there's a custom thing I got right from the spirits that I do.
Oh.
I've got certain objects of value,
Hmm.
let's say personal value, that I keep in a cloth, and I open up the cloth and I can throw them like bones. But there's not one thing means anything, but
Oh.
it's just something I manipulate with my hands to generate the state of consciousness where I can start thinking things.
I had a reading like that once. I think they referred to it like a trinket reading.
Okay.
And the woman she just like had this bag of like little trinkets, and
Yeah.
she kind of tossed them on this cloth,
Hmm.
and she also used a pendulum a little bit. I don't know
Okay.
what she was doing, but apparently the trinkets will have meaning to the person who's doing the reading,
Hmm.
and like where they fall next to each other. Um, can help them like gain meaning. I think it's more of a method of just trying to, I don't know exactly how I want to say this, making the connections in the unconscious mind and
Yeah.
having these
Yeah.
things that you're familiar with that can
Hmm.
allow you to do that.
Right. Yeah. And for me, it's just moving them around. The action itself isn't things themselves don't really mean anything to me,
Right.
except for they have personal meaning of some sort. But then I move them around, and eventually the answer comes, and
Mm.
I don't know how to explain it better than that.
Okay. Stephanie, what else do you do other than astrology and tarot
Uh,
and dreams?
that's and well, yeah, there's that. Um, I would say that those are the big two that I use. Occasionally dreams, but I always feel that the dream connections are more about my own psychology.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes I simply intuit something that's about to happen because the signs are all around. It's not, I don't think it's um, divinatory so much as picking up on the subtleties of what's going on around me
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
having that manifest through the dream.
Mm.
But most of them have been through tarot or astrology,
Yeah.
and they've pretty accurate.
Mm.
Um, and I don't always see it at first. It's one of the things with tarot is timing is just never really available. It's sort of like, yeah, this is what's going to go on, but not sure when. Um, and I found the more I concentrate on something, the more I push it out. If you
Hmm.
let go of it and don't think about it, that's when it that's when it happens. That's what it comes through.
Mm.
And I've done that with my jobs. Am I going to get this job? Or boy, I really don't make a lot. Something's got to come through, um, and I would do tarot readings saying, "Hey, relax. Things are going great.
Mm.
Don't worry about it." And then, a couple months later, if I'm not thinking about it, I have some raise that came through or some bit of money that came through that I had no
Hmm.
idea was on its way. And it's a way to look at that. I wouldn't say that. I've had apocalyptic dreams, but it seems more about what's going on in my own life. Uh,
Right.
uh, I've had these, alien invasion seems to be the big one I have. And it's usually when there's a lot of upheaval in my life,
Yeah.
something's going on. So it's a good way to track
Hmm.
what's going on in one's own life
Right.
because, uh, those,
Hmm.
uh, those dreams are giving you like little postcards, to let you know
Right.
something's up, you know.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something you mentioned earlier too. This that there's different levels of divination. They're not all about the end of the world or shattering,
Hmm.
apocalyptic in that sense. Like plagues and locusts and all that stuff. Sometimes it's just about your own life.
Hmm.
And just like there's different layers in the dreams. There's some of them that are just the brain processing the information you got that day. There's some of them that are about deeper processes, and some that are going to come through and bring something that's really important.
Yeah, I know that Jung kept track of dreams,
Hmm.
and right before World War II, there was a huge uptick in these apocalyptic style dreams that were occurring amongst his clients.
Right.
And, I think that's reading the signs around you rather well. Like, you know,
Yes.
the political situation was pretty bad for a while. So
Hmm.
people picking up on that sort of thing and manifesting it as some sort of apocalyptic scenario makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that might be happening right now.
Hmm.
People having a
Right.
lot of these apocalyptic style dreams. And we look at our political situation, we look at our environmental situation, and things are looking kind of bad. So
Right.
I would imagine that there's a lot of that going on. I don't know if any of you have done any research on the collective unconscious coming in dreams right now, but
No.
I do know there
Yeah,
are some people looking at that.
it would be difficult to do that. I think. It would be interesting to try to find a way. I suppose having people like post on a discussion or something. So if
Hmm.
anyone who's watching or listening has been experiencing apocalyptic dreams, please share with us.
Yeah.
um, I had a dream just the other night that Donald Trump killed a man, but and that wouldn't.
Was it in Times Square?
No, but it wouldn't shock me. And it was he threw like a sculpture or something and whacked him in the head, and that's how he did it. Um,
Hmm.
But didn't he just say that the president is allowed to murder people? I mean, that
well,
just happened in the
his
news.
Yep.
his attorneys
Right.
said that, and I think that's what it was. I think that with dreams there are so many different levels of dreams. I think
Right.
there's the basic, what I always refer to as garbage in, garbage out.
Hmm.
And I suspect that dream was a result of that, of just,
Hmm.
Yeah.
keeping abreast of the news. Then I
Mhm.
think there are dreams that speak to, like you were saying, Stephanie, and this is the majority of the dreams that speak to the individual psychology,
Mhm.
Right.
and at various levels. But I think that, and I think there are like what you can call big dreams.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but I also think that there are collective dreams, and those are
Mm.
rare. Those are rare, I suspect.
Right.
Um,
Um, any thoughts to the idea of mass media as the collective dream? Can we
Yeah.
look at what is coming out through mass
sure.
media and say, are there patterns here that are representing what's going on in society?
Oh, sure. And to I think that's a whole other discussion
Right. Okay.
in
Fair
many
enough.
ways. Um, uh, you
But
know,
is it? Is
uh,
yeah, it is. It certainly could demand its own topic
yeah,
of conversation one day. But
yeah,
you
media
know,
apocalypse.
Zizek, the
Yeah,
philosopher, has his whole philosophy is built it around the collective unconscious kind of bubbling up in our social media.
yeah,
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
so and what do we have a lot of in our social media? We have zombies,
hmm
um, a lot of apocalyptic stuff.
Hmm.
yeah.
You know, we seem to go in cycles of what bubbles up, and right now we're having a lot of movies centered around, you know, the destruction of the world, or at least of society. Civilization collapsing.
Well, yeah, and I don't know that. Uh, yeah, I think that's going to be its own episode at some point, and
Yeah.
I think it should be, because
Uh-huh.
I was actually thinking this morning of um, movies that I felt were prescient, and the most prescient movie I have ever seen is the movie Network. in terms
Oh,
of speaking of the media, because it got it right. And since we're here, I will share with you my little secret here of one of the divinatory things here that we didn't discuss about, but I think that
ooh.
has a remarkable record in many ways. And it feeds into this idea of media, and that is The Simpsons.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Good one.
Yeah,
Uh huh.
yeah.
Yeah, divination by The Simpsons. Nice.
Yeah. Well, and also, it's probably different now because everyone streams everything. But I
Right.
know when cable was how everyone got their media, there was a way, it's almost like bibliomancy. I guess it would be like cablemancy, where you could ask a question and then just like randomly select channels and see if you would get a message
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
from what showed up.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, but there's definitely a profound connection between the media and common consciousness, and
Mm-hmm.
that shows up in so many different ways.
Right.
It's always interesting to me how different studios will have a movie that is so similar
Mm-hmm.
to each other that appears in the consciousness at the same time.
Yes.
Hmm.
So yeah, um, I know we're actually starting to run out of time here a little bit.
Oh,
The only other thing that I've actually worked with a little bit signs in nature, but
yeah.
runes and dreams, of
Mm-hmm.
course. But runes, I worked with runes for a while.
Yeah.
Don't consult them as much as I should, but
Right.
definitely tarot is my go-to. So to the audience, is there anything we forgot in
Right.
terms of divination? And what's
Mm-hmm.
your favorite method of divination? We'd
What do you
love to
do?
hear that. Yeah, 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 for sure. So we mentioned Nostradamus, and I don't think any of us really know that much about
Right.
Nostradamus. Um, I think the issue with Nostradamus are a couple things that what he wrote was pretty vague,
Mm-hmm.
and we also suffer from my understanding is poor translations.
Mm.
Um, I don't want to say that he didn't predict anything, um, and but I don't know enough to say one way or the other. I know though that often what happens, there's a lot of fake Nostradamus stuff that we saw that right after 9/11,
Yeah.
where this thing was going around, the early days of the internet. It's like, oh, Nostradamus predicted this, and he didn't. It was made up. Um,
Right.
but it was said that he had predicted the French Revolution, Napoleon, Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
The 9/11 one's debunked, and apparently every now and then you'll see, Nostradamus predicted this is the year for World War III or something.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and yeah, that'll probably start this year or next. But
Cool.
that's my prediction. Um,
Yeah, and I guess they also use him in conjunction with some of the Bible code stuff.
okay. Oh yeah, we
Mm.
But
didn't have
I'm
the
not quite
Bible
sure.
code down. Yeah, yeah, that could be
And
its own thing.
yeah, some people feel they've debunked Bible code because they can open up any book and get the same thing, like they use
Yes.
Moby Dick.
Yeah.
And well, others have said, well, maybe you can simply do this with any book.
Yeah.
So, maybe it bubbles up in the collective unconscious, and anything we write, you get this code
Yeah.
that tells us what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I never really bought into the whole Bible code all that much, but and partly it is because I think that it is a derivation of something that's really old, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's mostly in Kabbalah, gematria,
Mm.
which is different ways of interpreting the, especially the Torah, and looking at combinations and numbers and everything. If you want more information, just go watch the movie Pi. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but anything else that either of you wanted to mention about Nostradamus?
No.
I just don't know enough. I mean, all the
Right.
stuff
Yeah,
that I used to get into when I was little was all like
yeah,
fake stuff. So,
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, so let's move on because I wanted to spend more time on this, and I think this is actually worthy of its own episode. But Stephanie, you are an expert on Marian apparitions and whatnot, and I think that I want to talk about the Malachi prophecies, the prophecies of the popes, and then also maybe kind of get into the Fatima prophecies as well.
yeah, I guess if we start with the Malachi prophecies, he was a 12th century bishop of Armagh in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and he, um, by all accounts, he was a pretty decent stand-up guy. He did a lot of so he did a lot of really good things. He helped the poor. Whenever there was a famine, he would plant apple trees, for people to eat. And um, so he was well respected, well loved in his time, and even going forward. They say that on his way to Rome to see the Pope, or maybe it was actually in Rome, about I think it was 1139, he goes to see the Pope for the first time. And there in Rome, he has a vision of all the popes till the end of time. You know,
Hmm.
so he only sees 112 um, visions, and he writes them down in a form of like a motto for each one of the popes. And as it so happens, and how it connects here is that it's seen as what's known as the doomsday prophecy, because that last pope really encapsulates um, the end of at least the church, where everything kind of um, all the bad stuffs kind of happens, and the pope ends up in being persecuted, and as is the church at that time. And what makes it interesting is that we are currently on that last pope, or
Mm.
at least some people think this. This is the 112th pope in that reading, and that's, of course, Pope Francis. Um, so we have a pope who is really currently under siege, in terms of um, the Catholic Church itself very divided on the things that he says. Like he recently came out and said to bless gay marriages. Maybe not. Um, they're not officially sanctioned, but they're blessed,
Mm.
and that caused a whole big you know brouhaha amongst the Catholic Church, and sort of turning in on itself. Whether or not they agree with the Pope, and it makes it very, very fascinating. But when you look at these prophecies, what's interesting about them, it's not really confirmed that it's considered apocryphal that he actually came up with it, and that's because when he wrote it down, and when it was revealed, this there's a disconnect, because uh, the initial when it was written down, it got put in the Vatican archives, and no one looked at it until 1590. So between 1139 and 1590, no one knew what this was, and so a lot of people thought it was a hoax.
Mm.
Hmm.
And then a lot of people thought, um, no, this is really cool. This is really interesting. So it maintains its relevancy within the church. Um, but what they noticed was that the first half of the prophecies were really rather aligned tightly with the popes, the mottos. And after 1590, it's a little more hit and miss.
Hmm.
So a lot of people think it's a forgery, a hoax.
Mm.
However, we look at some of them that are uh, current. If we look at the mottos of, and these are just like little phrases, we look at the motto of John Paul the First. His is of the half of the moon. Um, and John Paul the First was in 1978. His reign was less than a month.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, and his birth time. No, that's the next one. I'm sorry. Um, a lot of people see that as he wouldn't reign for more than a month. So that one was interesting. The next one that comes up is John Paul II, when his is the labor of the sun or of the eclipse of the sun. A lot of people saw that as he being born between um, eclipses, born and died between eclipses. So uh, that plus the fact that he was really dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and a lot of people see that as Our Lady clothed with the sun,
Mm.
which is a reference back to Revelation. Uh, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. They see that in the Catholic Church, a lot of them related directly to the Virgin Mary. So his dedication was always to the Virgin Mary.
Mm.
He's also the Pope who revealed the last of the Fatima secrets in 2000. So another connection there. Um, the Benedict XVI was the glory of the olive, and his connection to that, uh, one of the names for the Benedictines was um, the uh, Olivet, Olivetans, which is a branch of the Benedictines, which he was connected with. So uh, that's where they feel that olive connects in. And then the last one is called Peter the Roman. Obviously, Francis's name isn't uh, Peter. Um, but this one reads, in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of the seven hills, or Rome, will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. And then it just says the end. The end. No more words. Okay, we're done. So a lot of people see this as the current pope,
Mm.
um, someone under siege, someone who is pastoring the church through many tribulations. Which you have the sex scandal of the priests. You have him dismissing a lot of people. You have the church in a schism almost. Um, so I guess we'll see in the coming years what happens. But that is Saint Malachy.
Yeah, I first heard about this when I was in elementary school. And I
Mm,
didn't hear the name of Malachi, but I specifically remember it was when John Paul I died. I remember one of my
mhm.
classmates telling me the end of the world is nigh because of it. And that's the first time I heard it. Now, I like Pope Francis. I don't like everything about Pope Francis, but his environmental aspect, I'm right on board with. Um,
Mhm.
and I love Rome. I don't want to see anything bad happen to Rome. But if it's the end of the church, whatever.
Yeah,
Karma.
well, yeah, it's. I first heard about it probably like you when I was a kid, and I always was like, "Oh, that's so neat." And but when you look at the sayings, they are rather vague,
Mm,
um,
Mhm.
and you have to work for some of them to get those to really um, work.
mm,
I think the for was it Pope Pius XII, who reigned during the uh, World War II. Um, his motto is the angelic shepherd, and that you could see it that way, but you could also see it regarding how many people have problems with that pope based on some of the concessions he made to the Nazis. Some say, well, he had to in order to protect the church and to protect the people, and others are like, no, he really betrayed a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
you know, some of these you gotta you know look at and maybe take with a grain of salt. But
Right.
um, what where I think it's interesting is, yeah, we are at the last one. So some people see it as there's like an ellipses there, and that you could probably fit a whole bunch of other popes in there.
Mm.
That he didn't predict every single one, just
Hmm.
a certain amount, and then predicted the very last one.
Mm.
But I don't see any indication of that. I think that's sort of a way to cop out of if we happen to have another pope after this one.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always a way of wiggling into out of all these things, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what about the Fatima prophecies? I like the Fatima prophecies quite a bit. Sometimes referred to as the three secrets of Fatima. And it's three children
Yeah.
in 1916, right?
Yeah. In 1916, these little shepherd children, and they're Lucia de Santos, and then she's the eldest of them. She's 9 years old at this time. And then there's Francesco and Jacinta Marto. They are brother and sister, and Lucia is their cousin.
Hmm.
And one day on their way to be shepherds, um, they see an angel, and the angel at first is just um, saying a prayer and having them say it back and telling them not to be afraid. And this goes on for a little bit of time, for a couple of months, where they don't have consistent visions of the angel, but that's whom they see the angel first. And then in May of 1917, they see the first vision of Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? They see her, and she starts to deliver messages to them and show them things. And um, what they end up doing is people start to gather around as the children start seeing things, and word gets around. And at this time, they're also having conflict with the authorities in the village, because they think that this might be some sort of anti-Catholic or Catholic position against the newly found Republic of Portugal. Right?
Didn't the mayor kidnap the kids at one point?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're taken into custody,
Yeah.
and there's like this. Will they be there for the last vision?
Mm.
And people start gathering more and more, and basically he gets nervous that by holding them, it's going to cause more problems. So he releases them. And then in October of 1917, they have their final vision.
Hmm.
And that's where they have what's called the miracle of the sun, right? Where about 40,000 people, they say, were present. And uh, they don't know what's going to happen. They just know that Mary is going to reveal something, some sort of miracle at this point. So they all gathered there. And what people have reported was that the sun danced. The sun moved in the sky, it danced, it swirled, it came hurtling towards the people in what they thought would be the end of the world, because the sun is falling. And some people reported that it had been raining very hard, and that when this happened, everything dried up. Um, so that's the initial story, and then um, a little bit later on, two of the children, the two brother and sisters, Francesco and Jacinta, talked about how they were not going to live long, and that they were going to go and be with Mary. And as it happened, the two of them kind of got swept up in the Spanish flu that came around, and I believe they died at the ages of 10 and 9. Um, whereas Lucia is the one who is told that she will live longer. She has a message to deliver, um, and what that happens. We didn't really know there were secrets to Fatima until I think 1941, when they were revealed, or at least two of them were revealed. Um, and the secrets to Fatima were around the World War that they were currently embroiled in, and Russia. So they first hear one of the first secret is that they are shown a vision of hell, and there is where Mary tells them that to um, pray for everybody so that they don't go to hell. She becomes Our Lady of the Rosary. And for those of you who don't know what a rosary is, I think a lot of people do, but it's you have a prayer beads, which are broken up into what looks like 5 decades. There's 10 beads per decade, and each one has a mystery associated with it, and you pray it 3 different times to go through all the mysteries. And the
Hmm.
idea is that you meditate while you're praying on these mysteries of the church. So she was known as Our Lady of the Rosary because there was a big push that people needed to pray. And the idea there is that they prayed, and this goes into the other secret, is that if we don't pray for the conversion of the world and the consecration of Russia, Russia would come out and be a force to be reckoned with. It would destroy the world, basically. It would spread its error throughout everywhere. So that was, after World War I, we have Russia um, turning into the Soviet Union, right? It becomes a communist state. And then she also reveals that if we don't pray, that there will be another war, and this war will be worse than the one that we currently have. And that's, of course, World War II. She also talks about a light appearing in the sky before that occurs, and that would foreshadow the war starting. And in 1938, there was in fact an aurora borealis that was visible through all of Europe at that time. Um, so there's that. And then we don't know what the third secret is until the year 2000. And this, they say, is referencing the trials of the Pope
Hmm.
and what's going to happen with him. And the reigning thought of the time when it came out was that this was the attempted assassination attempt of Pope John Paul II, who became a huge advocate for Fatima. Um, and when that happens, there are still a lot of people saying, no, that wasn't it. There's more to it. And so there was that issue where there's still a lot of contention between whether or not the Vatican actually revealed the real secret or not. Now, there's a lot of problems with these because the first revelation of the secrets doesn't come out until 1941. And so a lot of people thought, well, yeah, they knew about it by then. They knew about what was going to
Yeah.
happen with World War II. They knew about what was going to happen with Russia. And so, you know, that's that. What can you expect? So it was revised to account for what actually occurred. Um, but a lot of people still very adamant that the secrets of Fatima are real. That the children did see something there. The accounts of what happened on that day in October of 1917, where you had 40,000 people, they're mixed. Some people saw nothing. Some people did say they saw the sun dance and that it hurled towards the earth. Um, some people said they didn't see the Sundance, but they saw all sorts of like rainbows and colors appear. And of course, the skeptics are saying, "Well, yeah, because you're staring at the sun." You know? So there's it's very it's one of those things where it's one of the very few Marian apparitions to be approved by the church.
Hmm.
There have been over, let me see, I think there's something like a few hundred, like 200 some, maybe 300 apparitions, and only 8 of them have been approved by the church, and Fatima is one of them.
Hmm.
So it's an interesting thing. It's fascinating. I don't know how much credence you can give to it simply because of when the secrets were revealed.
Yeah. Yeah. It, maybe it was a UFO.
Could have been.
Yeah.
Now, a
Yeah.
lot of people are pretty adamant that even if you can discount some things, that the children were seeing something.
Yeah.
Um, Something
Yeah.
had to be going on. Even their mother would say, "Yeah, the children knew they were going to die. They
Mm.
100% would talk to about it and be happy about it. They were not upset."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and there were things. I have a few notes here, like with the Russian aspect. That at the time, the concern was, it's like, oh, they're godless atheists. Ah. But flash forward to the 21st century, and the greatest threat with Russia is that they've become Christian nationalists in
Hmm.
a sense. And so it's really interesting how the prophecies are so within the context of Catholicism and Christianity.
Hmm. Very much so. And that's actually one of what some critics talk about, is that the children may have been frightened and scarred by um, talk of hell and
Well, who
hellfire.
hasn't been?
Yeah, right. But it could very well be that this was a manifestation of their fears and a resolution of it.
Yeah,
Like there's someone looking out for you.
yeah.
Um, and the children themselves would practice after the visions, like flagellation
Oh
and
wow.
self. What's the word? There's a word for it when you do that. Um, I can't think of it right now.
Self-flagellation.
Well, yeah, but there's a word when you inflict harm upon yourself as a form of um, uh, sort of relieving the sins of others. That they would do this so that they wouldn't just help themselves, but all the non-believers. Because
Mm.
this was something that really impacted them, and because of their age. I have to say that it really could have been that they were simply fed so much um, fear that you know it really could have been a manifestation of that. You know, now I don't know what all the other people who saw the sun zipping about. You know,
Yeah.
I couldn't talk
Oh,
about that, but it certainly could have been they looked at the sun too long.
yeah.
So
Mass
uh, and and
psychosis.
and this is interesting because it's really common in Marian apparitions that um, that she visits children.
Mm.
She reveals to them secrets, um, and uh, it has she has appeared to adults before, but in the 20th century, the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, it seems to be mostly children, or initially children, who then grow up and are still seeing her. You know.
I'm still going to go with UFO. Um, Likewise with Our Lady of Guadalupe. There's some really interesting aspects there as well. But I don't think there are any prophecies associated with Guadalupe. At least not that I can think of off the top of my head.
No, that was about building a church, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, all right. Well, we are pretty much at the end. So, let me ask very quickly. Um, if either of you have any final thoughts here that you wanted to add before we close this down for today.
No final thoughts at this point from me.
Okay.
No.
It seems to me that much of what we covered could be their own episodes, full episodes, especially with the Maliki prophecies and Fatima as well, and the Simpsons. So I want to ask, anyone who's watching or listening to this, what would you like to see us cover in the future?
Mhm.
Please let us know in the comments, and we'll take it under consideration.
Mhm.
We're here to please. Also, I would like to ask everyone to subscribe to the Rebel Spirit Radio YouTube channel and also Jeremy's Kill Devil channel as well. Jeremy, make sure that we put a link for your channel in the in the comment section,
Okay, I can
so
do that.
people can access it quite easily. Um, we will be back next month in February, and hopefully, I will have all of the technical issues solved by then. It was a weird one today. I don't know why that
Yeah.
happened. Um, but our next episode, I believe that we are going to look at apocalypses in non Abrahamic traditions. So, Shiva, we're
Mhm.
looking at you.
Mhm.
And this is going to be on Saturday, February 9th at noon Mountain Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Central's 1 p.m. Eastern 2, right? So I think I got
Yes.
them all right.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, thank you both very much for joining me today and for sharing your wisdom and your insights. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Nick.
And until
Yep.
next time, yeah. Stay safe in the apocalypse, everyone.